sixth graders, this lesson is on simple events. So we are starting our unit on probability, and our learning target is being able to find the probability of a simple event. So make sure you either have this notes template with you in hand where you got from in class, or if you've printed it up. Otherwise, use the notes template uploaded to Notability, or you can always write this down directly into your math notebook. So probability is a vocab word that I'd like you to make sure you have written down if you're writing this in your notebook, is the likelihood of something happening. Probability is always between 0 and 1 or 0% and 100%. So we can write probability as numbers, fractions, decimals, or percents. So we can see here in this table that there's different chances of things happening. So if something has a probability of 0%, that means that it is impossible to happen, like it cannot happen. And then on the flip side, if it has a probability of 100%, that means that it will certainly happen, like it is for sure going to happen. So for example, if you're watching this on a Wednesday, then it 100% will be Thursday tomorrow. And same thing if you're watching this on a Wednesday, that it would be a 0% chance of it being Monday tomorrow. And then we have 50% is just as likely to happen or not happen. And then obviously less than 50% would be more unlikely. 75% would be more likely. And then if you notice, if we just look right here in the likely, we can write it as a fraction, which is 3/4, decimal 0.75, or 75%, all being the same value, just different forms. So another vocab word that I'd like you to either write down or maybe highlight if you have the notes template is simple event, which means one experiment happening at a time with one outcome. So some examples of common simple events would just be rolling a dice, flipping a coin, picking a card out of a deck, picking an item out of a bag, and many, many, many more things. But if we roll one dice, it's going to land on a number, which is one outcome. If we flip a coin, it's going to land on either heads or tails, so that's one outcome, and so forth. We'll pick one card out, one item out of a bag, so we have one thing happening from our event. Another vocab word, so we have lots of vocab words in this video that we want to make sure that we know and understand. So we for sure want to highlight this word and know the definition of probability. So if all outcomes are equally likely, the probability of a simple event is a ratio that compares the number of favorable outcomes to the number of possible outcomes. So this formula should be written down somewhere in your notebook and circled or squared, highlighted, something like this. So number of favorable outcomes out of number of possible outcomes. So let's look at an example and see what we mean by that. What is the probability of rolling an even number on a number cube, which they're talking about a dice, that is marked with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on its faces? So we know that we would write it as the probability of an even number. I'm just going to write it like that. And then out of the outcomes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So each one of these is an outcome because each of them is something that could happen. So we have 6 outcomes of rolling a dice. What is the probability of rolling an even number? Well, I know 2 is even, 4 is even, and 6 is even. So I have 3 outcomes that would be favorable, which means that's what we want. We want an even number. Out of the total number of possible outcomes, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 total outcomes. Then we always write it in simplest form. We know 3/6 is 1/2. So the probability of rolling an even number on a number cube would be 1/2. We could write it as a percent. So the probability would be 50%. Sometimes it makes more sense to write it as a percent, and we can kind of visualize and think about it better that way. All right, so let's look at some simple events and some examples. So if we use the number cube above or the number cube from before, which again is just a dice, and remember a dice has 6 outcomes. That has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we want to find each probability, write it as a fraction in simplest form. So the probability of an odd number, so I look at my outcomes and I can see that I have 3 odd numbers. So 3 favorable outcomes, which my favorable outcome in this example would be an odd number out of 6 total outcomes. So 3 6. I'm going to write it as a fraction in simplest form, which is 1/2. And then just to remind you how to write a fraction as a decimal, we take our numerator, we divide it by our denominator. If I do that in my calculator, I would get 0.5. And then to change it to a percent, we take the decimal and we go over to the right 2, add a 0 in there, and that's how I get 50%. Probability of 5 or 6. So I can either get a 5 or I can either get a 6. So those are my favorable outcomes. So my favorable outcomes, there's 2 that because I can either get a 5 or a 6. And then 6 total outcomes. So 2 6. We can divide those both by 2, and I would end up with 1/3. If I put 1 divided by 3 into my calculator, I would get 0.33333 and so forth, so 0.3 repeating. And then as a percent, that would be 33.3%, or 33.3 repeating percent. And then if we have a prime number, the probability of a prime number, so remember that 2 is prime, 3 is prime, and 5 is prime. So I should have changed my color there. We have 2, 3, and 5. Remember, 1 is not a prime number. So we have 3 prime numbers out of 6 total outcomes, which is 1/2, and then that also would be 50%. Okay, we have some more examples of simple events. So if you would like to pause and try any of these on your own, that'd be awesome. And then you can come back and check and see if you got them correct. So we're going to write, again, probability of an event, whatever the event is, remember is number of favorable outcomes over number of total outcomes. So probability of flipping a tails. Well, if I flip a coin, I have 2 total outcomes. And if I want to get a tails, that's just one of them. So it'd be 1/2. And then we'll write that as 5/10, which is 50%. Picking a red card out of a deck of cards. So a deck of cards has 52 cards. And there are 4 suits, hearts, diamonds, spades, clubs. 2 of the suits, hearts and diamonds, are red, which means that it would be half of the deck. So a red card, there's 26 red cards out of 52, which we can simplify down to 1/2, which is 50%. So this basically is telling us that you have a 50% chance of picking a red card if you pick any card out of a deck of cards. If you're going to pick a spade, well, there's 4 suits. One of the suits is a spade. There's 13 cards because it's ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, king. So 13 cards that are a spade. So the probability of picking a spade would be 13 out of 52. And I know that 13 times 4 is 52, so there's 13 of each suit in a deck. So 13 50-seconds would be 1/4, which is 25 hundredths, which is 25%. Picking a 3, well, there's a 3 in every suit, which means that there's 4 3s because there's a 3 of hearts, 3 of diamonds, 3 of clubs, and 3 of spades. So 4 50-seconds. And then I know that if I divide them both by 4, I get 1/13. And then on my calculator, I'm going to do 1 divided by 13. And I get a really long decimal, so I'm going to round that to my nearest hundredth, which would be 0.08. So it would be approximately 8%. And then picking the 7 of diamonds, there's 1 7 of diamonds in the whole deck. So that would be 1/52. I'm going to do 1 divided by 52. And I'm going to round it to 0.02, so 2/100ths, which would be 2%. So you have a 2% chance of picking a 7 of diamonds when you pick a card out of a deck. And then we can see if there's 10 flowers in a basket, 5 are Gerber daisies, 3 are lilies, 2 are sunflowers. What's the probability of picking a Gerber daisy? So there's 5 Gerber daisies, so it would be 5 out of 10 because there's 10 total flowers, which is 1/2, 50%. And then picking a sunflower would be 2 because there's 2 sunflowers out of 10, which is 1/5, which would be 20%. So now we have an example of a random event, which is very similar to a simple event, but in this instance, we have a bunch of brass instrument players, and we want to randomly select a performer and find out the probability of what are the chances of picking a certain player from the group. So if we look at the probability of picking a trumpet player, well, we can see over here, here's how many players in each category of the brass instrument players. First of all, the very first thing that I want to know is how many total players there are. So I'm going to count it up, and I know 6 plus 4 is 10, plus 3 is 13, plus 1 is 14. So it's going to always be out of 14. So the probability of picking a trumpet player, I can see there's 3 trumpet players, so that's going to be 3/14. It tells me to write it as a fraction in simplest form, which that is in simplest form, so we can leave it as that. The probability of picking a flute player, well, I can see that there's 0 flute players, so it would be 0 out of 14, which would just be 0. So that is an example of an impossible event, because if you're going to pick someone from this group, it is impossible to pick a flute player. The probability of picking a brass player, well, we can see that they are all brass players. So any one of them is a brass player. So it would be 14/14, which equals 1. That's my fraction in simplest form, which that would be a certain event, and that would be 100%. This one, we could write it at 0%. And then probability of horn or tuba. So there's 6 horns, 1 tuba, so it would be 7/14, which would be 1/2, which we know would be 50%. And then lastly, the last vocab word that I want to make sure that you have written down is a complementary event. A complementary event it goes along with the probability of an event. So the probability of something happening, the complementary would be the probability of that same thing not happening. So let's look at this example. Ramon's teacher uses a spinner similar to the one shown at the right to determine the order in which each group will make their presentation. We're going to use the spinner to find each probability, right, as a fraction in simplest form. So what is the probability of not spinning on group 4? So basically, anything that is not 4 is what we are wanting to get. So I can see that there's 5, 6, 1, 2, and 3. So there's 5 sections that are not 4, so the probability would be 5/6. The probability of spinning a 4 would be 1/6, and I can see that if I add these together, 1/6 plus 5/6 equals, 6/6, which equals 1, and the probability of an event with the probability of a complementary event, like added together, should be 1 or needs to be 100%. the probability of not group 1 or group 3. So that means I could get 2, 4, 5, 6. So 4 favorable outcomes because those are not groups 1 or 3 out of 6 total outcomes, which would be 2/3. 2 divided by 3 is 0.6 repeating. Oops. And then if I round, or if I move my decimal to the right 2, I would end up with 66.6 repeating percent. And then if I look at, well, what about the probability of group 1 or 3? 1 or 3 would be 2/6, which is 1/3. 1/3 plus 2/3 equals 1. And another example that I like to use on the weather, sometimes they might say that the probability of it being sunny tomorrow, because we all like sun, is 90%. So then I know that the probability of it not being sunny would be 10% because these have to equal 100% because it's the probability of something happening with it not happening equals 100%. Okay, lastly, I would like you to do these 3 problems in your notebook or on your notes template, whatever you're using. So make sure you do 1, 2, 3, all of the questions and the answers, and please make sure that your answers are a fraction in simplest form and as a percent. So let's practice and refresh our memories of how to change it to a percent. And then make sure that your notes and all of these answers to these questions are with you the next time you are in class or on Zoom. So cohort A will be tomorrow, Thursday. Cohort B, please have them with you in class on Friday or on Zoom. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.